And so when I looked at that picture, it was a picture that says Africans are what I think during this war I heard of deserving victims and non-deserving victims. I'm not quite using the word, but if I remember, I'll put it on the edit here. But yes, and so we are Africans outside of Africa are treated like dirt. Unfortunately, in Africa, it is the same thing. The whole news, wall to wall, is dominated by what is happening in Ukraine. I don't know if you've heard of Ukraine before, but Ukraine never really captured my attention and held it at any point. There was only one time that Ukraine really came to my attention and actually focused there, but very, very blurry. And that's around, and to be honest with you, I'm really getting the date now because of what's going on now, and I have taken some time to understand what is going on, understand the history, and I've also understood what was just a little blurry, and I just watched on the news, and when it was gone, it was gone. And that was in 2014, 2015 when what is called pro-Russian president was overthrown. At the time, I remember the news coverage in the United States was laughing at him, how he escaped to Russia, and how his toilet was made of gold or something like that. And that's really what I remember, but I never really paid attention. And then as time went on in American politics, it came up again because Trump was trying to say the Bidens were in there doing something. So, to be honest with you, I never paid attention until this war really started, or shortly before the war started. And since the war started, I took some time. I understood the background, the history, and everything. Now, if you haven't spent some time to read the history or understand where America is coming from and where Russia is coming from and where Ukraine becomes important, please read it. Read it. Because when you read it, then you understand. And when you understand, I think there's a certain kind of peace that understanding brings. Okay? There's a certain kind of peace and resolve and an understanding not only of the situation but of the world in general. So once you understand, then you just watch what's going on. You listen to the news. You know what is important about the news and what is not important. You know what is propaganda. And to be honest with you, when you understand, then you are already like weeks ahead of what the news is reporting. Because gradually independent voices start coming out. And then those independent voices, you realize that because of your understanding, you are where they are. But here's why I want to do this show. I want to do this show because we as Africans should be watching that whole situation and learning from it. You know, I had an interview here with Ambassador Thibonage, and he made a statement that took me unawares. And the statement was that geopolitics trumps legality. And I think I'm beginning to see that more and more. I was listening to, in terms of my research, I was listening to a professor, Professor John Mearsheimer, I think that's the name. He's a professor at the University of Chicago. I think he's a specialist on what's going on in Ukraine. And some of what he predicted over 5 years ago is happening right now. And in fact, he predicted it as though he knew what was going to come up. And that's what that's what you're able to do if you understand the situation and understand human beings and understand the whole thing about geopolitics. And I'm bringing the statement by Ambassador Thibonage here because this professor came again and talked about geopolitics trumping legality.
I think that in international politics, states usually pay attention to international law and they pay attention to moral precepts as long as they're in their strategic interests. But if there's a conflict between international law and a country's strategic interests, the country will always privilege its strategic interests, and international law and human rights will be pushed off the table. This is why I think it's not very helpful to talk about rights.
And so while people are arguing about right and wrong, and I've gone past that because Ambassador Thibonage opened my eyes, and those who watched that show saw how surprised I was when he said that. I mean, you know that there's colonialism, there's all kinds of things happening, but you always think they're illegal, and that they should be illegal from beginning to end. So when somebody comes and says, no, geopolitics trumps legality, meaning he who has the power can violate the rules and get away with, then it really clears some cobweb that you were dealing with in the past and going around making yourself upset, not knowing that colonization can be justified, invasions can be justified in international relations. And like I said, this Chicago professor came and was very clear and expanded on it, because he had a debate where there was question and answers, and the same question I asked Ambassador Thibonage came up, and he answered the same way like Ambassador Thibonage did.
When you talk about whether Russia has the right to have a buffer state or Ukraine has the right to have its own foreign policy, these are concepts that, in my opinion, get you into all sorts of trouble. In the international system, might makes right. And the United States would never tolerate a situation where Canada or Mexico invited, in a legal way, China to bring military forces into Toronto or Mexico City. We have a Monroe Doctrine, which is in our strategic interest. And our Monroe Doctrine says no distant great power is allowed to put military forces in the Western Hemisphere, period. End of story. What the Russians are doing here is they're basically articulating their own version of the Monroe Doctrine. They're saying you cannot turn Ukraine into a Western bastion on our border. It has nothing to do with rights, right? It doesn't matter whether Ukraine has the right to do this or that. We're saying they can't do it. Just like we're saying Cuba can't invite the Soviets to bring military forces into the Western Hemisphere. So for me, when you talk about great power politics, rights in the final analysis just don't matter. Might makes right. And the United States is a mighty powerful country. It's a mighty powerful country on purpose, and it does whatever it thinks is in its strategic interest.
And so, having understood that, it seems to me that the most important thing for Africans to be getting out of what is happening in Ukraine is not so much taking sides. It's not so much taking sides. I think it's more learning lessons from it. It's more learning lessons from it. And the lesson you should be learning is, how do I empower myself? How do we empower ourselves so that when it is no more a question of legality, we can stand our own, at least defend yourself? That is really the lesson there. But the greatest of all the visuals that are coming out of Ukraine, the one that I paid attention to the most was this picture where Africans who, when things were right, I'm sure they were being pushed out of Ukraine. They were looking for ways for them to get out of Ukraine. Now, when the war came and everybody was heading out of Ukraine, they wanted them to stay in Ukraine. Nobody wanted them to join that train or enter that bus with them. And that is really something that should be of concern to Africans. I wanted to say and the whole world, but I think we've been trying to play this whole world game and world order and right and wrong. It doesn't work. So I think, just like any society, the world is made up of interest group, and what I want to emphasize is that Africans should be identifying what is their interest and focusing on it. Okay, and so when I looked at that picture, it was a picture that says Africans are what I think during this war I heard of deserving victims and non-deserving victims. I'm not quite using the word, but if I remember it, I'll put it on the edit here. But yes, and so we are Africans outside of Africa are treated like dirt. Unfortunately, in Africa, it is the same thing, and it is the same thing because the people controlling in Europe are the same people controlling in Africa. And so Africans are really at a loss. We don't have it at home and we don't have it abroad. And the question is, what should we do? What lesson should we as Africans be learning from Ukraine? From what is going on in Ukraine? And what should we be doing in Africa? Now, when I say we in Africa, I'm going to come back to that we. Let me write it here so I don't forget. Okay? There are two parts in this we. There's we, the citizens of Africa, the men and women of Africa, the youth of Africa, the old of Africa, people of Africa. There's we, who are treated as just part of our environment. We're not treated as people. I've been having calls that I should do a piece on how the whole world is talking about Ukrainian refugees. So people have called me and like, do a show on how they are treating Ukrainian war victims and how they are and how the war has totally ignored the victims in Ambazonia. They say in Ukraine, oh, they only have this few, and look at the help pouring into them. Look at the type of help they're giving them. Look at the whole world talking about them. And in Ambazonia, there are close to 40,000 civilians, women, children, old, sick, that have been murdered in daylight. The pictures are floating all over the internet, but no one has said anything. It's like it's not happening. Now, I have shown some reluctance in doing that because I think it will be redundant. I think it will be redundant doing that because again we are emphasizing the wrong things. We're trying to say, oh, we are part of humanity. You know, why are you treating another part of humanity different from the way you're treating us, or different from the way we have been treated? We have been treated in the same situation. I listened to parliamentarians. I think there's one very famous video by an Irish parliamentarian going around where she's screaming about Afghanistan refugees and how and what is happening in Afghanistan right now. Nobody's saying anything. You know, charity really starts at home. So the lesson I want Africans to learn here is ask yourself, how do we get to be like them and protect our own the way they are protecting their own? If there's anything that is sad about the whole thing is that I hear African leaders in Africa talking about Ukrainian situation when they are not talking about the Ambazonian situation that is worse.
The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine stands breached. The Charter of the United Nations continues to wilt under the relentless assault of the powerful. In one moment, it is invoked with reverence by the very same countries who then turn their backs on it in pursuit of objectives diametrically opposed to international peace and security. In the last two meetings on the situation in Ukraine and the buildup of forces by the Russian Federation, Kenya urged that diplomacy be given a chance. Our cry was not heeded, and more importantly, the Charter's demand for states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered has been profoundly undermined.
I heard the president of South Africa talking about how I think there's a question whether he was asked or is him suggesting to go and be the moderator between Ukraine and Russia. I actually have a statement by the president of Senegal, who is the president of the African Union. And he said, as president of the African Union, I am delighted about my talk this morning with President Putin to press for a lasting ceasefire. I don't know if I missed the African Union pressing for a ceasefire against La République du Cameroon, who is backed by the French, murdering Ambazonians now for over 5 years, where over close to 40,000 have been murdered, over 1 million are refugees, both in La République du Cameroon and in Nigeria and all over the place. I haven't heard a word. And I'll say another thing. that when people call me and press me to do a piece on injustice, I smile, because Europeans are the ones raising these questions. Europeans are the ones helping, or Westerners are the ones helping in Europe. And I just think that we should have gotten to a point in Africa where we can also talk about our own, because until we care about ourselves, until we value ourselves and value our own lives, nobody else will value it for us. Nobody is going to come and treat us better than we are treating ourselves. No government will treat our refugees better than our own governments and African governments are treating African refugees. But I tell you, one place or a group of people that have decided that they will treat themselves better and fight their enemies and not waiting for anybody. And that's the lesson that Ambazonians for over 50 years have learned, that they will need to take care of themselves because nobody else will. Because nobody else will. Because in their land they obeyed the Germans who came to colonize. They fought back but ended up obeying. Because that was the only way to save themselves, to fight another day. So they obeyed the Germans, they obeyed the League of Nations, they obeyed the British who took over from the Germans, they obeyed the Nigerians that the British used to govern Ambazonians and treated them horribly. They obeyed the British when they took their legal independence, which was written in Article 76B of the United Nations. The British said it very blatantly that you guys are, what was the word they used? So they took them regardless of what 76B said, because 76B was very clear that lead these people to their self-government or independence. It wasn't two ways. There was no two ways about it. That was international law. The British said, we don't care. We have the power, the geopolitics to overrule that. So they took the people of Ambazonia and gave them to the French. And the British are right now sitting and parleying with them and watch the people of Ambazonia killed, murdered left and right. Nobody cares. So Ambazonians or Africans are not free in Ukraine, and they are not free in Africa. But the people of Africa will have to decide. They'll have to get themselves out of that situation by their own bootstraps, and that's exactly what Ambazonians are doing.
One for one, one for all, Indian, warriors, expendable, 100, expendable, 100, forward ever, backward never, forward never, Asawana, Asawana, Asabwam, Esimili.
Take all their gun, take all their ammo car.
Okay, what you tell and I say, for that work will be welcome for on the 2nd of March. Now March is why they match them. So I believe you know I'm so no.
Yes, Masha.
Yeah. The 2nd of March. Other government officials are programs and this. I don't become one of military because military don't die, not know they happen for the Cameroon. Nobody knows they.
Yes, Masha.
So I don't decide it now. Now that top rank is them. We are need for the grant them day and night. So this one don't see I'm so. Now the top rank is that things them where they be hold them. This another matraye way there for here. This another matraye way there for the match of my foot. Now one day this moto. Then this one, na military way. He don't run to the one boss, he can jam na me. So I see be surrender M on my skin. I not begin not for there. Leave it to me go give the good news and wait we can see. I know be na say be there.
Yes,
so wait your tongue na say. One them where they don't can see am and the yellow tell una say one day where they don't can see am. May they go tell their friend Wait, they say, no, na so.
Yes, be Masha.
Na nakam na, nakam all.
Nakana, watana.
Nakana. Nakana, if you naka. So, I be sure them when the naka and the naka all kind of style, they see what way it be happen. So, ma tell you now, this our 20 counties where they for inside the southern Cameroon, my brother them. Una strategize, una plan, believe in your action. Una do a more than way to the fish or the do am so.
Yes, sir.
No, na don't talk.
Yes, be Masha.
So I know all na small plan down at the plan and so on and so forth. Una the talk so no one do this, no one do that. But ma tell una so one to una fail for understand. Na say soldiers there are soldiers with different categories. All that work on the worker, so I be aware for all na worker them. Una the worker the tonton go this side, go that side. But what we then as bro, you say statement say this 222. Now for finish, I know na so every day.
Yes, be Masha.
Right now, the agents of France who are running the place now are stunned. They thought they would bring their French-trained soldiers, French armed soldiers, and they will come to Ambazonians, and Ambazonians will bow. And my goodness, both Ambazonians and the French stooges are learning that the power of the human being is not even understood by the human being itself, except those that have really taken time to test it. Then they realize that there is nothing that one human being can do and the other cannot do. I'm going to tell you this story about the Japanese. The Japanese were a very dominant society that lived on their own, had their shoguns and their leaders, and they were running their lives the way they wanted to. The Americans wanted to trade with the Japanese, and the Japanese said, hell no, you're not going to trade with us. And Commodore Perry, the American Commodore Perry, came and stood in the ocean and bombed the Japanese to submission. Now, the Japanese did not bash Commodore Perry, did not go calling him names, did not think he was the devil, did not call him evil. What they did, they say, wow, we with our long swords, who clear everything in amongst us in our land, and we have control of it. These guys come and they stand at sea and they subdue us here. They did not give a chance for our sword. They did not even test our sword. And they admire that. History writes that it took 50 years for the Japanese to change their school system. Totally revolutionize everything. And within 50 years, they had turned their societies and empowered their humanity until they went and actually defeated a war. The first in history to defeat a white nation, Russia, in a war. The Japanese. Within 50 years of Commodore Perry's defeat. So Ambazonians are on the right track. Like I said, I really did not know of Ukraine. I'm looking at the number of Africans in Ukraine. At first I was thinking, what are they doing in the Ukraine? You know, because, to be honest, I always knew people went to study in Russia. And for some reason, I always looked at them like, are you thinking the same like we are? Maybe it's just the Western brainwash, okay? So I did not think that there were Africans in Ukraine. We as Africans need to take care of our business. And you will not take care of that business by waiting on your leaders. Because those leaders are appointed, they serve the foreign interests. I took a history class. an African history class. And in that history class, one of the comments that was made by the professor during lectures, and you know, some of these comments, when you hear them the first time, they stay with you. And the comment was that African leaders fought for independence. I put fought for independence because, you know, most African countries had their independence program. There were some that fought. Later, but the majority of them, especially the English colonies, mostly their independence was programmed, and it was programmed because Franklin Roosevelt had asked during this towards the end of the Second World War that colonization must end, colonialism must end, and Churchill asked, and he wanted it to end then. I mean, like in 1941, in the Atlantic Charter of August 1941. Go read it. Churchill said, "We were not training these people to govern themselves." It's funny. You see how ironic that statement sounds? So these are people who have been living for thousands of years, creating wonderful kingdoms and wonderful civilizations, and then you come and colonize them. And in fact, at that time, I think the colonization was less than I'm almost tempted to say was less than 60 years or 50 years. And these people are suddenly unable to govern themselves. But here's the deal. Churchill said, we cannot just let them go because we haven't been training them to govern themselves. So give us some time. Let's train them, and yes, that independence will come. And so Franklin Roosevelt says, sure. And then so the British, in order to show that they meant it, then they went and built some of the universities, Makerere, and some of the universities in Nigeria, in Sierra Leone, and then started training African leaders. And that's why you see a lot of African countries around the 60s, especially the British colonies around the 60s, they were all independent. So yes, Ambazonians are beginning to gain more footage, and you heard the general talk, and what he's saying is what has been happening in Ambazonia right now. In part of what he was saying, you heard him saying that they have been killing these French trained soldiers who are fighting for French interests, but that nothing is happening, and so they will start targeting the French command structure, meaning the officers who command the soldiers. And he told the citizens of Ambazonia, take to the bushes, because we've killed quite a few of them, and it includes administrators at this point. You really need to know it's a colonial state when even a local administrator is supposed to be the personal representative of Paul Biya. Paul Biya serves and is protected by the French, and so everybody else who serves knows that the only power in the place it's not people power where there's division or where there's checks and balances, and so no, everybody in La République du Cameroun serves Paul Biya, otherwise you'll be gone, because the French make him the head. In our local villages, there is not one person in our traditional way of ruling that commands everything. No. In democratic countries, there's not one single person who commands everything. But in the colonial system, where foreigners appoint who your leader is, they make that leader personally responsible for the ownership of that place. And so they tell that leader, okay, you are the government of this place that we now call Cameroon, and we own all the minerals there. Until we don't want it, then you can have it. You put 50% of your international transactions in our banks. We are going to send people who work with you, and they'll become your advisors. Okay, those are our direct representatives. You listen to them. If you don't, then you'll be out. So Ambazonians are really, really challenging a system, and they've challenged it for a while now. I was listening to one Francophone commentator who was saying that 90% of Ambazonia is controlled by the Amba Boys. 90% is controlled by the Amba Boys. So, and I was thinking, I'm like, he is correct. And so the only thing that is left is be able to stop these people who drop in once a while. And they do that because they know the government of La République and the French also know that Amba Boys control 90% of the territory of Ambazonia. And so most of the time you hear they live more by symbolism. And that's why you see they insisted that no, there must be AFCON must play in Victoria, and we must be in Boya. The only thing that Ambazonians need to do now is stop these helicopters that fly in, because if you saw the colonial governor who came in the name of President Paul Biya to establish that the duo who came in the name, as a personal representative of Paul Biya was killed. So they came to establish that we still are there. No, you're not there. You're not there. And very soon, I can promise. Just looking at just looking at the trend, very soon it will not be possible for the helicopter to come into Ambazonia. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to make this video to say that it was a humiliation of the black race in Ukraine, where they say, oh, you can come in, you can't. You can come in, you can't. You know they're doing that because you show up in black skin. But the rest of the world has decided that Africans can be sold as slaves. Africans can be colonized even in the 21st century. They can tolerate them to come into their schools and into their societies, but when things really come to focus and there's a choice, they will not be the choice. They will not be treated as just another human being. I was also reading a piece where Nigeria was lamenting about its citizens, did not like the way its citizens were treated. And my question is, why should Nigerians have to leave to go to Ukraine to go and study? What is it that they're studying in Ukraine? Because if you were to really allow Nigeria, even within the last 60 years, if Nigeria has been properly applied itself, I can bet you Nigeria will be where Korea is, and even better. So we are challenged. We are challenged. We can't keep begging around, begging for our citizens to be treated better, begging to be given this and that. We can do better because we have the potential to do better. I am really happy that the new generation is taking on the challenge. I am very happy that Ambazonians are standing up for their country and fighting like human beings, and guess what? They begin to get a lot of respect. The only respect Ambazonians really need is for the enemy to get out of Ambazonia. Let the Francophones and their colonial leaders leave Ambazonia. It's going to happen.